So let's get started. Yes, welcome everybody to SBA Live Academy. Today we have a special international guest, and you might know at least one colleague of him because for those who have been at the Sec4Dev conference this February, the colleague of Sebastian was there, Stephen Wirks. He did the threat modeling workshop. Now, Sebastian de Leer-Snijder is he is at Torion Security in Belgium. They are located in Antwerp. And I like to call them the SBA research of Belgium, or we are the Torion of Austria, however you want to put it. So we're very similar in our structure and in what we do. And we invited Sebastian because somebody was asking about OWASP SAMM, which is a maturity model for the secure software development lifecycle. I use it in my daily work as well, and I like it very much. It's an open source project you can use to assess the maturity level of your software security lifecycle or the development lifecycle. And yeah, I asked Sebastian if he could stop by at SBA Live Academy and give a talk about it. And he's one of the project leads of OWASP SAMM. So make sure to pay attention. This guy knows what he's talking about in terms of OWASP SAMM. And so please welcome Sebastian de Leer-Snijder.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. It's not too far. It's only an internet connection away. So indeed, so I'm going to talk about OWASP SAMM. Now, indeed, I was already introduced. So we have a company called Torion in Belgium. It's similar as with SBA Research. We're focusing on security consulting. I co-founded it about 6 years ago. But besides that, I also dedicate quite some volunteer time to OWASP. And OWASP, it's probably familiar to a lot of you, a worldwide non-profit organization that focuses on secure software, guidelines, advice, tooling. You might know it from the OWASP Top 10 or ZAP. But one of the projects that I've been personally working on together also with Bart de Winde, who is a co-lead, incidentally also from Belgium, is OWASP SAMM. Besides that, I've also been involved in OWASP for quite some years. So I started the Belgium chapter in 2005 already. Now, what is SAMM? What is this thing? SAMM is a software assurance maturity model. It's one of the flagship projects, and the objective really is to help organizations to become more mature and more proactive at developing software and systems. So it's focusing really on the activities that you're doing to make software and systems more secure. And the way we do that with SAMM is, I'll explain that to you, but it's really based on a maturity model that is built into SAMM itself. So before focusing on SAMM, let me take a little bit of a step back and I would say convince you or explain you why we need to have something like this. We're looking when we need to, I would say, secure software, and we need to have a look at how software is being developed and how software is being created. And typically you will see 4 stages coming back, and these will typically be iterations, like in sprints. But there will be some design functionality or design activity. Some code will be built. Hopefully this gets tested, and the majority of our software lives in a production environment. And you might have sprints or releases that influence this, but those are the 4 phases that we see coming back in various sizes. Now, in each of these phases, we are going to introduce or potentially introduce security issues. You have configuration errors, like not patching, not having correct TLS configuration, or you might have coding bugs, like not doing input validation or outputting coding, or you might have design flaws in your software and not selecting the right kind of authentication, not doing proper auditing, not taking into account the requirements. So there's different kinds of security issues, configuration issues, bugs, flaws that are potentially being introduced while we create and deploy software. And the way we tackle this is by adding security activities or building security activities into the way development teams are creating software. What we see in the more reactive way, and sometimes we see that in the more, I would say, immature organizations, is where software is being built, pen tested just before release or even after. If it's being pen tested, something is being patched and then you put it in production. Unfortunately, that is not a very effective way of building or adding security to software. It's not, there is no on-off button in terms of security. It's not some magical dust we spread over our software and all of a sudden it becomes secure. You really have to think upfront as part of design and building what you need to do. And so you need to think of adding security requirements or taking into a security requirements, thinking of the threat modeling. So what Steven Wirks explained when he was in Austria a couple of months ago. This is part of a design activity. Making sure that when, as a developer, you start coding, that you understand what the issues are, that you take into account coding guidelines, that you perform static code analysis, that you perform dynamic security testing on whenever you create a new version. For instance, you use OWASP SAMM to perform testing on your software. And then, obviously, when in production, you do the necessary dependency checking, vulnerability scanning, you can have application firewalls. So you see there's a lot of different activities and tools and techniques that you can introduce. And together with your, I would say, development practice, together that creates what we call, or that forms like what we call a secure development lifecycle. And that's where SAMM comes into the picture. SAMM gives that a structure, and SAMM will help us on how to introduce these kind of activities, because you can't do everything at once. It's not that from one day to another, you'll start doing all these things, and maybe it's not even necessary for everything you do. So why do we need something like SAMM? It's or a maturity model. There's a couple of reasons here. First of all, by adding software security activities to the way we create and deploy code, we need to do some change management. That change is something that's not happening very fast. It has to be iterative. Also, when you do this for your organization, you have to think what is unique in terms of risk to my software, to my organization. So you have to tailor that to whatever you are creating in terms of software. And also when you use this kind of like secure development lifecycle activities, you need to understand what it is. So a solution or a model, a maturity model or an SDL needs to provide enough information and details for people that are involved in developing and creating and using actually the software in a way that they can understand it. And above all, and that is the most, I would say, the most interesting thing about SAMM as a model, all these activities that you're adding to the development lifecycle, you need to be able to measure how you're doing them and if you're doing them and how effective they are. And that is I would say the biggest value of SAMM, is that makes an SDL measurable. And once you can measure something, you can also start managing it. So that is the SAMM itself provides a building blocks and a framework for the activities, but it also provides you the means to measure what you're doing and how you can manage that activity later on. Now, SAMM itself has gone through a couple of versions. So I'm going to explain the latest version, version 2. And the latest version, and I'm going to go directly to the website, is online. So the best way to consume and to understand SAMM is to go to the website OWASP SAMM, and you'll come to this page. And there's basically three steps on how to get started. This will walk you through very first steps to understand what it is, how you can assess yourself, and then there's also a future project that is benchmarking how can I compare myself with peers. And that is, I would say, the content of the website itself. The model itself actually is available online, and this is the SAMM model. And the model itself is built up of a couple of business functions, and each of these business functions has security practices, and each of these have maturity levels. And I'll explain later on how these work. but everything here is consumable and available online, and you can click through and you can see the different maturity levels, Q&As, or the questions that are in particular allow you to measure this activity. So, but the guidance, the documentation is available online on the website. Whereas in the past, earlier versions, these were documents which you had to download. Now you can document and consume everything directly online. And that is a big difference with the previous version. Also, I'll explain how we created that. But that is, if you're new to SAMM, I would say definitely have a look at that there. Now the structure of how SAMM is structured, like I said, it's focused on assurance of software, and it has 5 what we call business functions. When compared with the previous version, we have a new business function implementation, but it's focused on how do you organize these activities in terms of governance, how do we embed security activities in terms of design, how do we embed security activities in terms of implementing software, verifying software, and operating software. And in each of these business functions, we have 3 security practices. And I'm not going to explain all of them. That's not going to work here. But each of these security practices in these business functions have security streams. For instance, for threat assessment, you first of all need to understand what kind of risk profiles does my application have, and then how can I threat model that application. Those together make up a threat assessment security practice. Now, each of these security practices within SAMM are described, and this is a screenshot of the PDF version. And online, it has an objective, it has the activities, has the results. We're going to add again success metrics. So it's really described how it works, but also what it has for each of the security practices, there is 3 levels. So I'm going to take one example here. That is requirements testing. I'm going to take some time to explain this one. So security or requirements testing is really the security practice where we have created some software and we want to make sure that that is appropriately secured. And so for each security practices, there's 3 levels of maturity. Level 1 is ad hoc typically. In this case, we are opportunistically finding basic vulnerabilities or other security issues in our software. A level 2 maturity level is a more structured way and a more tuned way toward the application. How are we sure that security is built in a proper way? And then in level 3 is really the level overall where we also learn from what we're doing and we're feeding back into the other activities. So that what we found in terms of security bugs, we also push back into coding guidelines, that we make sure that the security metrics are being updated and that we learn from our mistakes. And this kind of levels, how I explain them, they are true in terms of implementation for all the other security practices as well. Obviously, they will, depending on the security practice itself, be a little bit different in terms of objective, but the levels are the same. So it's ad hoc, somewhat structured and application-based, and then having a feedback and an improvement cycle. In terms of requirements testing, there's 2 streams. There is what I would call like the positive and the negative testing. And the positive stream is to make sure that in terms of controls, we control that they are working. And we are, for instance, level 1, we're testing for standard security controls. And then level 2, we are the test cases are derived from security requirements specifically for the software. And then level 3, we're doing regression testing. So we're making sure that whatever we've tested in the past is being tested again and again. And you see an increasing level of maturity in this security stream. Whereas the more, I would say, abusive negative case testing is focused on having some fuzzing testing on a level 1, creating abuse cases and business logic flaw testing on a level 2, and doing denial of service and stress testing in a level 3. And so here again is an increase in maturity. And this is how SAMM works. And the way you start using SAMM is that you start with the basic level activities. You make sure that you do this in a way that you're familiar and that you build up that capability together with the team, and you're doing that and learning from that. And then you gradually increase the maturity of your, I would say, capability, and you add extra activities to your, I would say, development lifecycle and deployment lifecycle of your software, based on the descriptions that are being provided by OWASP SAMM. Right? So to repeat, we have 3 levels of maturity. For each security practice, we have 2 streams. And then in each of these streams, per stream, we have 1 activity that is being described in OWASP SAMM. That is how it's being described. Now, how do you measure that? How do you assess what you're doing? There is a toolbox, and there's also links to that toolbox. Actually, this is a spreadsheet you can download where there's questionnaires basically asking, based on the activities, are you doing these kind of activities? And this is an example assessment of strategy and metrics. Do you have risks known for your applications? Do you have some kind of planning around that? Do you review that with your stakeholders? And so in terms of strategy and metrics, if you can answer this, you have some kind of an idea where you are in terms of maturity level. And that's how that works. What the toolbox provides you is with a way to do pre and post assessments to show progress, or to even create roadmaps. And I'll show you shortly in a small demo how you can do that. So I've downloaded, for instance, the spreadsheet here, and you should be able to see the spreadsheet right now. So once you download that spreadsheet, you have it's a big questionnaire. So it's quite some questions in there. But once you understand how it works, it's not that hard to do it. And it's built, like I said here, a strategy and metrics, or maybe we can use another one, for instance, training and awareness. Do you have your people in the teams? Do they have SDLC training? Well, at least half of them. And you see immediately that we have an increase in maturity of 0.25. So if you do all the activities in one security practice, you can get it up to level 3. But typically you will be lower in the beginning. If the training is customized or not, that is typically a level 2 maturity activity. But it could be that some of the training is already, I would say, customized, but you're not using a learning management system to track that. So, and in that way, you can measure and see where you are. And the toolbox also provides some kind of scoreboards where you can see what the outcomes is, and you can even do some basic roadmaps where, based on a level, so in the first phase, that's your level. And for instance, by 2 months, you want to make sure that all of the people have received training, that all the training is, I would say, customized in two phases, and that we have an LMS and a certification for by the end of an implementation phase. And in that case, and if you do it like this, it creates like an automatic, I would say, flow, roadmap and a diagram of how you can increase your maturity of education and guidance. And I've now demonstrated how you can do this for education and guidance, but this you can do, you can use a toolbox for all of these security practices. So that is how OWASP SAMM works. There's a QuickStart guide that explains how to do it. It's available online. Typically, you first have to scope what kind of teams are involved. You do basic assessment, you set or you define where you need to go, and then you can start creating these roadmaps, implement it with OWASP resources, and iterate and improve your activity. What's important is that you align this on the risk level really of the applications that you're working with. So that is how to apply SAMM. A little bit also on the project itself. It took some time to create version 2. We have been working on it with quite a big team over the last couple of years. And what we've learned also ourselves is that to work on this kind of like open source projects is to make sure that we have a good underlying system that supports in creating the OWASP SAMM itself. And so what you see in terms of model on the website here, we are not creating, or we are not writing this directly into Markdown. Underlying is all the activities, all the questions, all the answers, all the security practice. The whole structure is now based on YAML files. And each time when we update or we change something, these YAML files are being verified, created, and then Markdown is being created, and we actually rebuild the website from scratch. That's a Hugo-based GitHub page or GitHub website, and we deploy that. And there's also an intermediate system in there that whenever we have a new action triggered, and whenever we have a new functionality being fixed, is that we push that to an intermediate environment where we can test before we push that to production. So we've built our own, I would say, CI/CD pipeline for the website, and this is also the way we produce everything. And so there is a PDF generation from the YAML files. The toolbox, what I've shown you, is not copy pasted. So the questions that are in there are based on the same YAML files. So they're automatically pushed into an Excel template and then pushed online. And we also have, I would say, other organizations that, for instance, use this. And just to give you a little bit of an example, there is other organizations that consume this and create their own, I would say, calculators based on this, and that use the YAML files just to recreate that same kind of functionality. So, and there is this version, there is someone in India who has recreated like a dashboard that is being pushed on the GitHub. So there's a lot of reuse now of the underlying, I would say, YAML files. So in terms of what we're going to do next, so we now have the ability to iteratively improve. We're going to add, we already had some agile guidance. We're going to add more agile and DevOps guidance. We're doing roadshows, trainings. We are actually working again on benchmark. So benchmark is gathering data from organizations that donate their measurements so that you can start comparing yourself. And I would say my advice would be, I would say, if you're developing software, or if you have, I would say, a supplier that develops quite important software for you, try it out. The proof is in the eating of the pudding, and see how it works. And I would say share what you've seen so far with the community, so that you can learn from that and improve the model itself as well. Which brings me to nearly to the end of this session. Next month, and actually that is in 1 month and 2 days, we'll be organizing an online virtual OWASP SAMM User Day, where you're more than welcome to join that. And so if you want to know more, we're going to do talks, roundtables, workshops. If you yourself already have some experience with this, you're also more than welcome to provide a topic. If you want to do that, there is a call for topics on the website. So there is some OWASP SAMM User Day here. There's a call for topics that you can fill in here. So you have still 1 week to fill that in if you want to participate. And then in terms of joining or collaborating on it, we have a Slack channel, Project SAMM, on the OWASP workspace. If you want to join, I'll add the join link in that slide as well. And then we have SAMM on GitHub. We have a newsletter which you're welcome to join to get, I would say, the latest. Obviously, I'm not doing this alone. There's a lot of people from all over the world that actively work and participate in this project. We also are being supported quite quite some organizations that help us pay some of the bills in terms of technical editing and marketing support and so on. So thank you for that. And that brings me really to the end of a very short, I would say, introduction of what OWASP SAMM is about.
Thank you, Sebastian. Very good talk and very good overview. Thanks for giving this talk and for taking the time. We have a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask them if that is okay with you. The first question I'm seeing here is there also a level 0 for activities that are not performed at all?
Yes, yes, there is. So I haven't put too much time in explaining the levels, but if you're not doing it, you are actually at the level 0. So indeed there is. So there's I would say there's 4 levels. There's level 0. You're not doing it, and then level 1, level 2, level 3, in terms of maturity.
Okay. Second questions. Are there any kinds of certificates that you can get for an organization based on SAMM?
To my knowledge, there is no. I would say there is no formal certification scheme for SAMM. It's a maturity model, which I would typically recommend to tune towards your organization in terms of pick what's good, what works for you, and throw away the rest. But that being said, it's the advantage of SAMM being very specific in terms of maturity levels and questions. You can use SAMM to assess how you are and to have some kind of scoring on that. And if you would do that with a third party, and that third party, I would say, provides you with a report on how you're doing, then that counts as, I would say, some kind of certification, but there is no formal certification scheme. There's quite some organizations that do some, I would say, some consulting. Most of the sponsors are also involved, but there's others behind that. But to my knowledge, there is no formal certification scheme.
Okay, next question. Can you tell where SAMM fits nicely into ISO 27001, if at all?
Yeah, so it will fit a subset, and it typically is the systems development part of the ISO 27000 control. So it's focused really on software creation and deployment. So it will not cover everything, but you can do some of the mapping to ISO 27000, but in particular for the parts that are related to software creation and deployment.
The next question relates to another OWASP project, namely ASVS. And there's the question, what is the relationship between SAMM and ASVS?
Well, there is no direct relationship. Obviously, they're both OWASP projects, but the ASVS is really focused more on specific verification requirements. So if I would need to map it, it would probably be more on the testing part, the verification part, and the security testing. And so if you would map it, would probably map best on the SAMM business function verification first, and on the security requirements as part of the design stream as well, of the design business function as well. But ASVS is focusing more on the very specific, I would say, list of requirements. It also has some kind of levels associated with it, but it's more levels of assurance specifically for the software that you are applying ASVS on, where SAMM is more focusing on the process that you apply to create that software, if that makes sense.
Next, I have written down some questions as well. I'm going to ask if that's okay.
Okay.
So SAMM measures the maturity level, and it gives you, at the end of the day, it gives you a number. When do I know when it is enough?
That is one of the hardest parts of a SAMM, I would say, implementation. And I'm going to give you the consultant answer. It depends. Because it really depends on, I would say, the kind of software that a team is working on, and on the one hand, and the risk appetite of the organization that's using that software on the other hand. So if you're building software that, for instance, being used in a medical device, which if it would not be working adequately is life-threatening, you will want to push that maturity level very high. Whereas if you're building a very basic web shop to order sandwiches online, probably you don't need a level 3 in terms of maturity levels. So you need to align your SAMM maturity targets to the risk level of the software that you're working on.
Mm-hmm. I've seen on the website that there is now you can compare yourself to other organizations. First question, is that working like in BSIM? We have something similar, like comparing, for example, also with the financial industry or healthcare industry and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And the second question, how much data is there? Is there enough already, or do you still hope for more donations of data?
Mm-hmm. So with regards to BSIM, so we have a shared, I would say, origin history. When Praveer Chandra, who created SAMM in 2007, created it, he created it when he was paid for actually by Fortify, and Gary McGraw was on the board of advisors of Fortify, and noticed that, and then together with first with Praveer and then later on their own started BSIM. Out of that. So they have a shared, I would say, history and a shared structure, but BSIM went the way of, I would say, measuring what, I would say, customers of Cigital were doing, versus SAMM is more like a maturity model, an open source model, where different organizations can pick whatever they choose and apply for them. So it's a little bit different. So it's in terms of methodology and philosophy. But they have a shared, I would say, origin story. Where BSIM actually is indeed interesting is that they have a big data set. Now it's not all open. We have some basic numbers there. Whereas in SAMM, we don't have that yet. We've had a first benchmark initiatives a couple of years ago, and then we had about 40 data sets of different organizations that donated some measurements, but that was not enough to have a critical mass in terms of benchmark in data. Now, Brian Glass is within the project taking it up again since the beginning of this year, and I'm saying this year, calendar year. And he's gathering more data throughout these months. So hopefully we'll have enough, and I keep asking organizations to donate. And if you know of organizations that are actively working with this, please ask them to do that again. We do allow for total anonymous donation of data sets. I understand that that's important for organizations to have some assurance around that, on the one hand. And it's going to be, once we have enough, we can start using it. And we have, but the critical mass, we haven't reached it yet. I think it's probably around like between 50 and 100 data sets, depending on the quality of the data.
Okay, a question that I asked you in the beginning before the webinar started already. What are the main differences and advantages of 2.0 compared to 1.5?
The biggest change is that in the 2.0 we have the implementation business function, where we've actually added security practices which were not present in the version 1.5. I have to realize that 1.5 was created in 2007. We were still, I would say, in a, between brackets, waterfall world, or I would say the majority of the software was created in a waterfall world, where now we are more in agile and a CI/CD driven, I would say, deployments and creations and usage of software. So we've added secure build, secure deployment. Defect management also was something that was spread a little bit throughout the previous model. So that's the biggest change. And then some other changes is that we've now added, I would say, a more logical structure throughout the different security practices. For instance, take threat modeling. There's a very logical level 1, level 2, level 3, and it will all be focused on threat modeling activities. Where in the previous model, sometimes you had all of a sudden new activities popping up in level 2 or level 3. And there was no, I would say, stream concept between the activities on the different maturity levels. So that is something that also changed, and changed also the, I would say, the structure of version 2.0. And then last but not least also is that what we've added is, in terms of measurement, and I haven't explained that so far, but quality criteria. So where in assessments in version 1.5, it's just like you do something or you don't. In version 2, to be able to say, okay, we are actually doing threat modeling for some of the applications, you need to make sure that, for instance, that you use simple threat checklists, and that you persist the outcome of a threat model, and that you have some risk level selection on the application based on risk. For high risk application, you do it, or on low risk applications, you don't. And so this is something that we've introduced as part of 2.0 as well.
Mm-hmm. There's still questions coming in. Do you still have time to answer them, or do you have to run?
Yeah, well, not. I don't have a hard stop. I'm not going to do this all afternoon, but
no, that may be 2 more questions I have here.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah,
that is okay.
Yes.
So, have you ever seen minimum maturity level requirements being mentioned in an RFP or RFI, like a CMM?
Yes, I have seen that. I've actually also been involved in some public tenders, for instance, by the Belgian government. And what I do see is that, I would say, when it's being used in this kind of context, is that on average, organizations tend to use the level 2 as a minimum level. So that since there's 3 levels, and then aiming for at least having an average of level 2 maturity in the activities, seems to be a logical level for this kind of context. But again, there you need to align it on the kind of software, on the kind of environment that you're going to do your RFI or your RFP for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the last question I see right now is related to cloud-related software. How is cloud covered, and which points are relevant for cloud-native application architectures?
Okay, that's an interesting question. The model itself is, I would say, environment or methodology agnostic. So in what I mean with that is, you can apply the model for on-premise, on hybrid, on cloud, on microservices, serverless, whatever. There is no technology-specific maturity or activities in there. So in essence, you can apply this on cloud development, but there is no specific language in the model, nor is there, for instance, to waterfall or agile or DevOps, nor is it, for instance, this is something that's applicable for a small organization or for a big organization. So and that was, I would say, the biggest challenge with the model, to keep it, I would say, at the same time, somewhat technology agnostic, but keep it, I would say, relevant enough and I would say usable enough for these different environments. Mm-hmm. And we're going to extend the model with more specific guidance. I can imagine that that we would extend the SAMM model with a very specific cloud guidance. For instance, how do you do secure build and secure development deployment in a cloud environment? It's not too difficult to imagine specific guidance for cloud service providers or cloud development, and to add those pointers or the guidance in the model. But we now have the model, and we've added, I would say, there's placeholders for mapping with other controls and with typical guidance. We're starting with agile guidance, but technology specific or platform specific guidance can also be added.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one last question before we let you go. If I wanted to contribute to OWASP SAMM, where would I start?
I think the best thing is join the Slack channel, engage with the community and the Slack channel. Let me go right here. Or Project SAMM is so I'm sharing it right now. So here, there's even questions from somebody today here. So we have 355 people who are active in Project SAMM, and to be able to join, I would say, this Slack workspace, you need to have the link to actually join that, and let me share that. Here is that particular link. I'm going to share that in the chat window.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Sebastian, for being part of this and for taking the time to talk to us about OWASP SAMM, to answer all the questions. Actually, the questions took longer than the presentation, or almost as long as the presentation, which shows that there's a lot of interest of the people, and I think that's cool. Thanks everybody for being part of the SBA Life Academy. The next session is going to be next Tuesday. It's going to be about the intersection of cryptography and law. So we have a law professional here at SBA Life Academy who has also some technical knowledge, and it's going to be a very interesting talk. It was actually the best perceived talk at this year's Sec for Devs. He's a very, very good speaker. Don't miss this opportunity. That's next Tuesday, 1 p.m., same time, same location. Thanks everybody for being here. Thank you again, Sebastian, and see you next time.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye. Stay safe.